So Dr. Torgesen is awesome. I think it's where I was. His research career is focused on reading and prevention of reading disabilities, including studying cognitive characteristics of children with learning disabilities and developing assessment practices and tools for children. In fact, he is co-author of two of the most widely used diagnostic tests for reading and reading difficulty, including the comprehensive test of psychological processes and the test of word reading efficiency. With support from Governor Jeb Bush of Florida, Dr. Torgesen established the Florida Center for Reading Research in 2002. The Interdisciplinary Center's mission has been and continues to be focused on conducting basic and applied research on reading and literacy development, assessment, instruction, and intervention, and disseminating information gained from that research to support policy and practice in Florida and beyond. Since its establishment, FCRR has grown to become one of the leading reading research centers in the world. In celebrating our 20th anniversary, we thought it important to both honor and reflect upon FCRR's fundamental core value of integrating research and practice to ensure reading for all learners. What better way to do that than to invite our directors to join us to reflect upon who we are, where we've been, and where we're going. And it all started with Dr. Torgesen. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Torgesen and his guests, Dr. Nathan Clemens and Stu Greenberg, to talk to us about what they think about FCRR's past, present, and future. Dr. Torgesen.
So these days, it's really good to have somebody stand up before you to get all the kinks ironed out. So this is the first talk I've given to a group like this for 12 years. I used to be able to stand up and not worry so much about what I was going to say because I had said it, 10 times in the last month, somebody else. Anyway, it's good to be here with you. I'm just grateful for Nicole's direction of the center and for all those who set this meeting up. I'm particularly grateful that it's in this venue, the Beth Moore Lounge in the Longmire building. This building is sort of connected deeply with FSU's history, isn't it? And one of the things I love most about it is the vintage smell. That kind of slightly musty smell, it reminds me of the lodge at Wakulla Lodge. If you haven't been down to Wakulla Springs and gone to the lodge there, that's really a wonderful old Florida experience. So let me see, I want to be sure I don't forget what I'm going to say. So, when we started the center in April of 2002, we really hoped that it would have a life greater and longer than the projects that led to its initial founding. That was our hope. We could never have imagined, though, a group like this 20 years later, with your diversity of focus, diversity of the professors you work with, the extensive range of research and applied projects that you're involved with. It just never was, we couldn't capture that in our expectations for the future, but here it is. So I'm just really grateful. It's taken a lot of hard work and dedication. It's interesting when you think about a center like FCRR, it can accomplish things through its faculty and staff and students that we couldn't accomplish by ourselves. So the sort of the group effort, the group sharing and so forth leads to outcomes that we really couldn't expect if we were just working all by ourselves. Same thing's true conversely, I don't know if it's conversely or not, but on the other hand, it's true that each of our own lives, our capacity to do the work we're interested in has been enhanced. I think this is true for most of us by our affiliation and association with the center. So we were able to produce some wonderful outcomes, and it's been a source of enrichment. I can think of many people whose lives were changed by their coming to FCRR and having a chance to work with other like-minded people. And so that's a real, not unintended outcome, but maybe important outcome of having a place like the Florida Center for Reading Research. I want to recognize at this time the contributions of a couple of my colleagues that I thought of first when I was thinking about what I would say. And that's Rick Wagner and Chris Lonergan, who've been associate directors of the center for 20 years. It's just interesting to say that sentence, isn't it? There have been associate directors for 20 years. That's a long time. I looked on the internet for some quote that would memorialize that kind of long term, but I didn't find something that was really appropriate. So we'll just leave it there. But you know, their contribution has been enormous to the research and training mission of FCRR. And I just wanted to recognize that at this time. So when I was called and said that we were going to do these lunch and learn sessions, and said that as a former director, I had the opportunity to kind of organize one, pick a topic and so forth, I thought about it for a few minutes, and then I thought, well, let's do a session on data-guided decision-making in reading instruction. And I thought about that and came up with sort of 3 reasons why I wanted to have a session on that, or why I thought that would be a good session to do. And so, working. Okay, so I have to have a PowerPoint here so that you could understand what I'm saying or follow it. So the first reason why we're having a session today on this topic is that our efforts at the center to improve database decision-making in a very large group of Florida schools provided the core funding and the core set of applied tasks for the first 5 years of the center's existence. It is what gave impetus to the foundation establishment of the center. And I'll talk just a bit more about that and show you a few numbers, which I think are, I just found them the other day and they were pretty impressive to me. Second reason is that the state of Florida right now is in a transition phase. I just learned this morning that the first part of the sentence is not true. I'm saying that they're replacing their year-end assessment with a set of progress monitoring measures, but I understand they're keeping the year-end assessment now. That's what Stu told me. Well, anyway, they're beginning a new emphasis on trying to implement progress monitoring measures in schools as a way of improving decision-making about instruction. So that's another reason. Then the third one is that this is really a consensus topic. I mean, I don't know of anybody who's either been in the school, well, maybe some who've been in the schools, but no researchers who would argue that it's not important to use data in guided instruction. But as Dr. Clemens will illustrate for us later, probably there's still lots of important questions to ask in that area. Okay, so let me just describe what we did in the first 5. So this is my historical contribution to this. So in the first 5 years, this wasn't the only thing we did, but this was a major thing we did. So the first task we had, and this was part of the implementation of a program called Reading First. See, can I see by raise of hands how many people have heard of Reading First? Okay, that's most of you. It was a program, federally funded, grants awarded. Florida had $50 million over 5 years to implement this program. And one of our jobs was to develop a computer-based system, or I guess any kind of system, but we decided to do a computer-based, web-based system that would help schools monitor progress in their students and have really good reports of their progress available to schools, teachers, district level people, and state level people, okay? I want to recognize somebody in that regard. Some of you will remember Carl Hook. He wasn't an education, well, he was an education professional, had been a 5th grade science teacher and had been working on some other projects, and he became available to become sort of the lead person in once our system was designed, which was called the Florida Progress Monitoring and Reporting Network. We called it the PMRN with great affection, right? It was Carl's job. It was Carl's job to implement it, maintain it, and deal with the issues and so forth. So I want to recognize him. And the second part, of course, this effort was to train massive numbers of teachers throughout Florida to administer progress monitoring assessments, something that most of them had never done before. We also trained lots of coaches to administer these measures, and then also some things about how to interpret them. And the person who did the major share of that work was Dr. Patricia Howard, who was sort of uniquely qualified to do this work. She'd been a school psychologist most of her professional life, worked at several districts, and was currently the state level director of school psychology. So she knew everybody in Florida, and thus was able to accomplish this task force. So I just want to show you a couple of slides that show the growth of this system over the first 3 years. First year it was implemented was 2004. We had 520 schools in it. So you can imagine these schools are administering these assessments, entering the data in the PMRN, and then to use the reports and all this stuff. What a massive task that was. And then the next year, 930 schools. And after that, the third year, 1,760 schools were in it with corresponding increases in number of students. So anyway, we're grateful for all the people who worked. And I don't want to forget Yakov Petcher. He analyzed mountains of data from the PMRN, gave us lots of great reports. This was before he was even a doctor. He was a graduate student at FSU when he became the director of research at FCRR, and he really, well, you all know he's a brilliant guy, so he really helped us a lot. And one key last thing I want to talk about is our help desk for the PMRN. You can imagine implementing this sort of from scratch, getting schools to do things they've never done before. What a challenge that would be in terms of helping them to do it. So Carl developed a help desk, which responded to, well, let me show you. So in the first quarter of 0506, they answered 26,000 email requests for assistance, right? And they responded to 17,000 telephone calls. I mean, I didn't remember that at all. I just found these slides when I was looking through some old slides. I thought, well, that'd be an interesting number to show. Something you didn't expect to learn when you came here today. Anyway, okay, so that's some of the history of FCRR related to this topic of our session today. Oh, Nicole told me not to touch the microphone. I just did. Can't wait. You can't wave your hand when you come up here. So actually, this is a picture of Carl helping one of the people at the help desk. And we had, I don't know, 12, 13, 14 people working constantly at this help desk. So now I'm going to introduce the real speakers of this session. The first one is my good friend, Stu Greenberg, who really has a very long and distinguished career in trying to make all of the things that we've discovered work in schools. Right? He has worked in providing direct assistance and coaching and supervision at the school level, at the district level, at the state level. And he worked at FCRR for 5 years, providing this kind of help all across the Eastern Seaboard. You told me at lunch or something you had traveled 700,000 miles?
Yeah, in those 4.5 years.
In those 4.5 years. So that was a lot of traveling and working. But anyway, we're so
Not all at one time.
Yeah. So anyway, I'm not going to list all of the things Stu's done, but just to say that I don't know anybody personally who's better qualified from a practical standpoint to talk about this topic to this group. And next, after Stu, we'll have Dr. Nathan Clemens, who is an associate professor of special education at the University of Texas and is well known for his research on database decision-making, progress monitoring assessment, and dyslexia. And so this is Nathan's first trip to Tallahassee and his first exposure to FCRR. And I know he had a really good exposure this morning in his conversation with the students. In fact, he commented on the fact, hey, only at FCRR am I going to get questions like this. So congratulations to the students who were there. So I overstayed my time, I think. Well, actually, we're doing good for time. So if you want to tell a few extra jokes. So let me just, since I have a little time, let me tell you my best reading joke. Chris is already frowning back there because he's heard this joke many. I told it at dinner last night. Right? Oh, I don't have the slide to go with it. I was thinking to put that in there. But anyway, so my grandson, my oldest grandson, who's now 26, married and has a child, this comes from the time he was in kindergarten. And he was going to school in California. And his kindergarten teacher was using a program called Zoo Phonics to teach the children to read. This is a program that has a pretty good explicit component in phonemic awareness and early phonics kind of letter sound stuff. And they came home for Christmas from Los Angeles to Tallahassee in December that year for Christmas. And David, my son, told me a story that had happened just 2 weeks earlier with his son, Andrew. Andrew being the kindergarten, right? So they were reading together a little book, decodable text that his teacher had sent home. Andrew was doing great. He was sounding out those words lickety-split. Came to a word that doesn't play fair, one of those irregular words. And his dad says, Andrew, he said, you can't sound that word out. You just have to learn that word. Andrew looks up at him. He says, Dad, he said, that's because you don't know zoophonics. Anyway, so I've told that joke probably, I don't know, 100, 150 times giving talks. But the point I always made from it is that here was a child in December of his kindergarten year. And he already knew there was a system, right? A system that he could rely on to some extent to help him deal with those words he'd never seen before in print. And that's a great lesson. Reading is much more than just phonics, but it really goes a long way toward getting kids off to a good start. And I'm just really proud of the fact that one of the things that FCRR has done over the years has helped to publish that fact and helped to encourage teachers to use those skills in their work with children. So anyway, I'm running out of things to say. And so I think, who comes first? Is it Stu? Yeah, I think I got you first on my list. That's right. Stu comes first. He's the applied guy. He's going to talk to this about from applied perspective. Then we have Dr. Clemens come. Okay. Okay. So do you know how to get your own PowerPoint slide? Let's see. Found it. Oh, that's not right. That's. I don't know. I'll let you. I like that one.
So while we're waiting, I'll tell you like a very quick story. I was really happy working in Broward County, where I'm from, Fort Lauderdale. One day I get this call, like 4:30, 5 o'clock, and I hear this raspy voice on the other end of the phone. And he's like, hi, is this Stuart Greenberg? And I'm like, yes. He's like, well, hi, this is Joe Torgesen. And I'm like, the Joe Torgesen? Like, and he said, yeah, I'm Joe Torgesen, Tallahassee. I've heard about the stuff you're doing in early reading. And so
You can do my slide.
and so I said, no, wait, which one of my friends put you up to this? Who are you really? Why are you calling me? And he said, well, we got this grant with Reading First, and we heard that you're an implementer and I'm a researcher, and why don't you come up to Tallahassee and we'll just kind of talk about what you do. And I said, no, really, who are you? Like, why is this prominent reading researcher calling me, of all people? And so we went on the call. I flew up and I said, oh, how will I know you? He's like, well, I'll be the guy wearing the FSU hat at the airport. I'm like, wait, I'm flying to Tallahassee and you're going to be the guy in an FSU hat? And really, who put you up to this? And so I came and had that talk, and we hit it off. And then I get home and I get an email from Joe that says, okay, so when can you join us? And I'm like, I thought it was a chat, not a job offer. And so that's how I came to be. But for those of you that are here, this is the most wonderful organization in the world, right? The credibility of the research that comes out is amazing. To this day, the state of Florida and throughout the country rely on the Florida Center for Reading Research. It is amazing. And so when Joe asked me to come back, and I got to spend almost 5 years, and each day I kind of reflect on different parts of my life. I never thought I would have that opportunity to do those 5 years and to learn from the people in this room. So when Joe asked me to do this kind of a users chat, he framed some interesting questions. So one, to identify the challenges, like why is it so hard for schools to improve reading? And then second, why is it so hard to sustain? So I wanted to kind of frame that about what's so difficult. And I wanted to do it through the lens of a school, a real school. And so this particular school, Montclair Elementary School, right, in Escambia County, where I spent my last 5 years. So you can see way back in 16, their reading proficiency was 14%. So one of the highest poverty schools in the district, 14% of the students in 3rd through 5th grade were meeting the standard. The school was an F. So part of the reason why it's so hard in Florida, I think, to get really strong, sustainable implementations in reading is because people play a school grading game, right? They're worried about their school grade. And you got to have somebody who's worried about the kids learning the most important skill of a lifetime. So in the next year, principal from a successful school said, I'll take on this challenge. Came into the school. So that's what the NP stands for, new principal. And new principal, the threshold for improvement from a F to a D is you've got to go to at least 31 points. School gets to 32, right? So they're thrilled, right? Slight improvement in reading and then learning gains, lower quartile, other things. So enter me. I come into the district because the superintendent said to me, because in another life, when I worked at DOE, my job was to work with the lowest performing schools from Madison to Pensacola. And luckily through my team's effort and my knowledge that I gained at FCRR, every one of those schools improved to a C. So enter me, but I enter after the year starts, right? So the district has been using a core program for 5 years. After 5 years scoring 14, not only did the district give up, but the teachers surrendered, said, we're not doing that anymore. We'll just make up stuff. And so I come in as a partner and I say, well, I'm going to coach your teachers on the stuff they should use. And the principal, because I had a good background in relationship building, trusted me, allowed me to work. But I said, we're going to do this 2 ways. We're going to work with your K2 teachers and we're going to work with your 3-5, because we're never going to get you where you got to be by always just focusing in on learning gains and playing a school grading game. So we increased it, to 24. Wasn't bad. Our learning gains went up. But then in the next year, I said to the superintendent and I said to the principal, let's put in high quality instructional materials, right? So that's what the HCI is. And we're not only going to put it in, but we're going to provide the professional development to the teachers. We're going to coach them on it. We're going to stop everything else you do. We're just going to focus on the stuff that's important. And then when we were measured, we went from 24 to 34, biggest jump that school had ever had, right? And we made sustainable gains along the way. So this is kind of the roadmap. So one, we had to identify a vision. And not only identify the vision, but we had to share the data. And I gave every teacher a challenge. I said, and the principal bought into it. I'm going to focus and I'll be co-accountable to at least 50% of every classroom achieving a target of proficiency from kindergarten through 5th grade. Joe used to say things like, no child left behind, it should have been fewer children left behind, right? And that was my idea. It's a doable goal. We can get at least 50%, right? So trust me. The second thing is I got them to trust me by comparing our data to other schools, like schools and not like schools. Right? Teachers are competitive, right? You show them other like schools that are doing better. Or I used to use the story of Hartsfield Elementary where Joe and Ray King proved against insurmountable odds what can be done. How many schools that are successful do you need to see before you say, I'm going to be the next one? Or are you stuck in the mindset of saying, you don't understand our circumstances? I like to say, if I need to tell you more than one story and show you the data, then you won't be convinced no matter what I say. And so we had to set those achievable targets, and we reported progress every 2 weeks, right? We used progress monitoring tasks, brought back in Dibbles into the school for K2. And then in 3-5, we used the measurement of what was in the tools teachers were already using because we went back to a high quality core reading program. The other thing we did is we had data chats with students regularly, every 2 weeks. We had to have data chats with students, and we also had to make it relatable to their life goals. We asked every student, what is it that you want to be? And we wrote it down. And every time we had a data chat, we brought it back. And over time, and what we did is we sat in on the data chats, we did some of the data chats, but if you're going to change a school or a system, you have to be co-accountable, and you can't tell people how to do it, you have to show them how to do it. And you have to be there every day. So one is identify the vision. The second was we had to prioritize. We said we're only going to focus on two things. Actually, it was three. Core program, one set of supplemental, and one intervention program K2, one intervention program for non-readers 3-5. And so again, I said, well, we're going to use corrective reading. They were like, oh, it doesn't work. I said, well, we can teach kids to read. Here's probably why it didn't work. You didn't see your scores go up. They went, right. Good. We're also going to ensure that kids read and practice new skills and write. So when people say, oh, we've done that, but it didn't work. So tell me a little bit more about what you've done and tell me what, and so, okay. We filter that around. But what we also did is something that I learned at FCRR is we practiced our lessons. We did away with all of the other meetings in the school, and I said to the principal, when teachers get together, we're going to have them practice lessons. A little bit I learned from a guy by the name of Jeff Colvin, who was at the University of Oregon. He and George Sagai did some positive school-wide management things, was pre-correction. I would say to the teachers, write down the names of students that you can predict will make errors in learning to read or learning to think and learning to write. And let's practice pre-correcting it before you teach it. Suddenly the unruly, the kids who couldn't learn, were now learning and were more engaged because we can predict what they were going to do and we can overcome it. And so again, it was like this relentless focus on using data without using data, but by saying, let's use the errors that students make. And so we articulated our expectations, not only to the faculty, to the parents, but to ourselves. Like everyone could agree we can get 50%. Everyone agreed and worked at it. And for the students who weren't going to be proficient, we didn't leave them behind. We made sure they grew. But we didn't do it for a school learning game kind of activity. So we also did these show-off lessons. We said to teachers, we were going to come in and do our administrative rounds 3 times a week. We wanted a show-off lesson for kids who were doing well, a show-off lesson for kids who were on level, and then an intervention group. And we would give feedback. And then we also said, would you like us, me, and the 2 administrators to come in and do a lesson as well? And teachers loved it. But what we also said is we're going to come in and do the lesson and we're going to practice with you the week before the way you're practicing your lessons. We became part of this team. So not only articulating the expectations, but walking the walk with the teachers. They have to believe you can do this. As a matter of fact, my last 2 months in Pensacola, I went to the superintendent in our lowest performing school who had lost 2 teachers, not lost, they resigned, right? They couldn't do it, 5th grade, 2 left. This was the end of March. And I said, and the district's response was, we'll put a different teacher in every day. I went to the superintendent and said, how about this? Nobody wants me walking around their school 2 months before the state test, giving them advice. I'll take the class. Right? And it wasn't because of my effort, but the school made it. Right? Because everyone saw we're part of this solution. Aligning the professional development, and forget the it for the tide, that was a mistake. I didn't spell check it just yet. But we tied feedback to the PD. And we presented the faculty with a year's worth of plan. So the teachers knew from early August when they came back until June when they exited. When was PD? What was it going to be about? How did we integrate it? The really neat thing about teachers is when you give them a picture, people who are really well crafted get there faster. Those that need the support know where they're going, and others you can coach daily. But giving them a full year, so they knew their time. You ever, teachers have busy lives and they have lives outside of school, but we had to let them know how to do that. And then we took away this notion of privatization. No longer could it be, I shut my door and I talk. Teachers didn't like the term walk and read anymore because that left a bad taste in their mouth. But we said what we're going to do is we're going to move students to instructional groupings for reading so we can accelerate them. And everyone's going to work together. And suddenly it was okay because we took away the privatization of I shut my door and I teach. It became a really collaborative, fun place. And this notion of continuous monitoring and feedback. So we celebrated regularly. We let everyone know how we were going to celebrate, but we celebrated our teachers for their show-off lessons. Right? They allowed us to take videos and show it at faculty meetings and to parents. We actually had a parent night, 3 of them in the year, where we put the students at an elementary school on stage, showing off how to learn to read and doing writing activities. Cafeteria was packed. And that's when we celebrated our families. So doing those 6 things in a system really paid off. Why is it so hard to sustain? It's so hard to sustain because school systems are really a collection of individual schools. And it's not until they become a system can change happen. And what's really hard is for when principals do well, they get moved up. The really great part of Montclair is we showed what was possible. The really sad part about Montclair, the principal got a promotion. New principal came in, didn't agree with one thing. No one in the district made them sustain what we were doing. Result, kids aren't as smart. Families aren't as supportive. And so it's really hard to put that change into a system and then sustain it. But I will tell you, the worth of FCRR is you continue to show what's possible. And that's why that second bullet is there. How many effective schools do you need to see before you say we can do it and we will be part of it? The work that FCRR does is it has far-reaching effects, well beyond Tallahassee. I was able to turn around 14 schools in Escambia elementary schools because I could show them a study from FCRR that says if you use high-quality instructional materials with this kind of PD, here's what you can get. Schools aren't used to that. Schools are used to autonomy. And for every student that doesn't succeed, that's a child lost. So the work and the research that goes on here, keep doing it. The impact is amazing. It's really hard work. And you will affect someone who will take over this work at a school and change a system. That's my hope. And I've seen it. When Joe was leading the charge of Reading First, it was amazing to see the commitment of teachers from Maine to the Virgin Islands where we supported. I mean, like Joe put up those numbers of the kids in the PMRN, those were real kids who were learning to read better and teachers had better data. So I can only tell you really 2 things as I leave. The work that you're doing is amazing. It affects thousands, probably millions. Keep up the great work. You're part of an elite group. I'm not going to try to close that because other things, bad things. Yeah. Okay.
Oh, let me just say, I don't know if I said this when I was speaking or not, but we will have a question and answer sort of roundtable when everybody's done. So that'll come after Dr. Clemens. So sneak your questions or criticism.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. I'm Nathan Clemens, and I'm really honored to be here. I I think I'm destined to knock this thing off the podium, so I'll do my best not to do that. But I think I'd first like to express my gratitude and admiration for the work by all of you at FCRR. The work that has emerged from this center has been remarkable in its impact and influence and benefit on children, teachers, and parents. I think also it's been motivating and inspiring for other researchers like myself. And so I'm really appreciative of that. Thank you, Joe, for your leadership in the center in the start, subsequent directors, and Barbara, Don, and Nicole, and taking the center to new heights. And I think for all of you, current and past faculty, students, staff, the work you're doing has made a difference. So thank you. And I'm done. So I'd like to talk about some issues related to database decision-making, some current issues and lingering questions. I think I'll probably frame it around some statements and questions that I think were perhaps something provocative, at least to me, and I hope you find them as well. Some issues that I think are still current today. A lot of this will be structured around this idea of the need for simpler, smarter systems and processes, and thinking about how we can do things more economically, parsimoniously, and efficiently. And the reason I bring that up is because there is evidence, and I think many of you have probably experienced this on a daily basis, that schools struggle to implement complex multi-tiered academic support systems. The Fuchs had an article several years ago in talking about large-scale efforts around RTI and MTSS, in which many schools did not have any students in at least one intervention tier, maybe making some decisions that were ill-advised based on the data. Other large-scale efforts like in Milwaukee, almost half not demonstrating any adequate implementation. Most did not implement multi-tiered instruction, some of the core principles of some of the model. And I think this extends also to data collection and interpretation, that there's evidence that there are still some significant skill and knowledge gaps in teachers' ability to collect, to interpret data, to link it to instructional decisions. And I think it extends, and that's true, I think, of both general education and special education teachers and school psychologists. And Stringfield and colleagues brought up the paradox that now educators have access to perhaps more data than they ever had before, but still many lack the knowledge and skills to put it to use, or maybe even the time and resources to do it. So I think there's several things we can think about in how we can think more efficiently about data collection, how we use data, how we translate it into actionable intelligence for instruction intervention. So one idea, one notion I'll bring up first is to not screen when you already have the data to do the job. If you're thinking about later performance on, say, a state test, or performance on some high stakes exam, evidence indicates that the best indicator of that performance is students' performance on a prior year on that same test. Okay, and several studies have demonstrated that you probably don't need something additional. In some situations, perhaps maybe an additional one-to-one assessment can be instructionally relevant or provide some instructionally relevant information for a smaller subset of lower scorers. Again, much smaller in that situation. Ben Pally was a student at UT Austin and did his dissertation examining or conducting a cost effectiveness analysis study in grades 4 through 8. This is over 19,000 students, looking at comparing prior year's test scores, Ames Web Plus, an additional screening measure brought in, and then some sort of multi-gate, multivariate approach. And he found that the prior year test scores were by far the most cost effective. Ames Web was most expensive and least accurate. The multi-gate was least expensive, but also introduced more or higher false negatives. And so again, pointing to efficiency and parsimony. You have data that indicates what students you have to pay more attention to. You probably don't need additional things in most situations. I think we can also look at what teachers bring in helping to ease burdens around screening. Can we consider, or can we have more greater consideration of teacher ratings? Teachers are privy to a lot of reading and reading related skills, some of which are very difficult to assess directly. Skills around language and interaction and syntax. And teachers, even after a few weeks, can give us some insight into which students may benefit from additional support in those areas. Deb Spees and colleagues, and some individuals in this room contributed this research, showing that teacher ratings of overall reading achievement or reading problems contributed to an efficient battery combined with direct screening measures to identify struggling readers in first and fourth grades. There's evidence around single item kindergarten readiness skills as functioning, as well as some multi-item scales. And then the identification of students at risk for dyslexia, teacher judgment plus a small subset of measures resulting in some fairly sensitive identification of at-risk readers. Again, things we can do to ease the burden, make things more efficient, more parsimonious in decision-making. I think we have a lot of questions still around how we can better support pre and in-service teachers in how they develop skills in database decision-making, particularly around collecting progress monitoring data, setting goals, making database decisions, using that information to know when to adjust instruction and how to do it based on the scores you've collected. So Jessica Toss is leading a grant at UT entitled Project Expert. Here we are developing content that will build teachers' content knowledge and self-efficacy in goal setting, helping them make decision rules, evaluate data, and link that assessment to instructional changes with instructional videos and content. We're also developing a self-monitoring tool for teachers to self-monitor their use of database decision-making, providing prompts on when to make decisions and when to do, and what types of approaches to take with the data they're collecting. It also involves fostering stronger collaboration between special education and general education teachers, because the project is working with kids in grades 2 through 4 with specific learning disability or dyslexia. Those students are shared basically by a general ed and special education teacher. And so the project is helping to foster stronger collaboration between them. I think there's also a need for a renewed emphasis on early prevention-oriented models for at-risk readers. I know that that's not a new concept, certainly, but I think we need to continue to refocus and renew our emphasis on them. Hugh Katz and Tiffany Hogan had a great paper recently on this very idea, renewed attention to the importance of early preventative interventions for students at risk for word-level reading disability. Response intervention, remember that term, right? I think, unfortunately, I see, and I'm not sure if this experience is shared, but I tend to see some fatigue around the term response intervention or MTSS. I think because the systems were perhaps too complex. Also, I think the response intervention term got too embroiled in the controversy around LD identification, which it is part of that. But I think at its essence, perhaps one of the most important parts of this is that it provides a system for early identification of risk and early delivery of supplemental support and intervention. In kindergarten, it might be a place where that is most beneficial. It's the first place where effective core reading instruction or supplementary interventions can have significant chances of improving reading outcomes for at-risk readers. A key feature of that prevention-oriented type of approach to intervention is the use of data to know when instruction is successful and should continue versus when instruction should be adjusted to improve student progress. Now, one of the issues, however, there are several in this space of early reading, early literacy in kindergarten, but we probably don't need 13 different types of measures of early literacy progress monitoring to choose from. Okay, a lot of publishers out there have published and developed a number of different types of measures designed to measure progress of beginning readers. And they put them out there with very little guidance on what to do. Say, good luck, okay? And I think that leads to some paralysis in terms of what we should do, what teachers, what decisions they make. I think we can identify keystone skills based on decades of reading research to know what skills are essential for reading development, are key targets for instruction, and therefore go-to places to focus for measurement. And that's one of the things that motivated this project. This was the Early Literacy Measurement Project, which is a Goal 5 project funded by IAS. And here we investigated and published measures for monitoring kindergarten reading progress, taking several of these measures and saying, okay, of them, if publishers are going to do this, to put them out there and say, good luck, choose what you want and have fun with it, can we perhaps provide some guidance on which measures might be more, maybe better indices of progress or lack thereof and thus better metrics for evaluating progress and designing intervention. So we had 426 kindergarten students. They are considered to be at risk reading difficulty at the start of kindergarten. And across the fall of kindergarten, we administered 4 measures: letter naming fluency, letter sound fluency, phoneme segmentation, and a computer adaptive test. Beginning then in the winter and across the second half of kindergarten, we added word reading fluency, decodable words fluency, and a nonsense word fluency measure. And then we followed up on reading skills at the end of kindergarten and into the end of first grade. So we had a number of different types of studies, and we're still sorting through some of these data. But one of the studies we looked at, and again, what we're doing here with this project was trying to find, can we boil this down? Can we narrow the field down to measures that are better indices? What can schools rely on perhaps a little bit more in informing their decisions around early intervention? So we conducted dominance analysis. We looked at, of the measures, their point estimates, and which are most predictive of reading skills at the end of kindergarten, at the major times when we assess them. At the start of kindergarten, the computer adaptive test tended to be the most predictive. It had the greatest range, most likely. But by December, things had flipped, so that letter sound fluency was now the most dominant predictor of later kindergarten reading skills. Across the second half of kindergarten, now word reading measures start to come into the picture as being the most dominant. You have decodable words and word reading fluency, and by April, then a measure of word reading fluency, a broader measure of high frequency words, was the most dominant in indicating or predicting subsequent reading skills. So that's one data point. The second was we asked to what extent is growth in sublexical fluency, so skills that exist below the word level, letter naming fluency, letter sound fluency, phoneme segmentation fluency. To what extent is growth across the very early stages of reading development predicted of subsequent growth in word reading in later kindergarten? Okay, so in here we conducted some latent growth models. Sorry, this is, as you can clearly see, what we found here was that of the 3, letter naming fluency, letter sound fluency, or phoneme segmentation fluency, letter sound fluency tended to be the strongest predictor in terms of predicting the rate at which kids would grow in word reading across the second half of kindergarten. Okay, the rate at which kids grew in acquiring letter sounds and naming them more quickly, indicative and predictive of the rate at which they grew in word reading across the second half of kindergarten. This was true for both a measure of decodable words, all entirely decodable words, as well as a measure of words that was both decodable and partially decodable as well. Okay. And finally, we're looking at right now, this is still a paper that's under revision, but we're looking at which measures is growth most predictive of more long-term outcomes into first grade. Again, we're finding that, sorry, I'll talk. Yeah. So again, letter sound fluency across the fall of kindergarten, word reading fluency across the spring, explaining the most variance in subsequent reading skills, tended to be the best discriminator of students who are on a trajectory towards successful reading outcomes versus those that had more significant persistent challenges in reading. And so taken together, if kindergarten really is an opportunity for this prevention-oriented intervention, which I believe it is, the 2 measures that, instead of considering 13 different ones, we can narrow the field down to an index of letter sound correspondence and students' fluency in being able to do that across the early stages of kindergarten. And then as the curriculum shifts in the second half of the year, focusing more on word level and beginning text reading skills, a measure of word reading fluency perhaps across the spring, and providing an index of progress and informing intervention. I think we'd also consider how advances in theory and evidence on reading development and reading disability inform new questions about database decision-making. I think there's some really exciting work happening right now that's building off of and working from triangle models of reading development, connectionist models of word learning that discuss and that argue for a distributed network of connections within and among words in how word reading is acquired. Things like Perfetti's lexical quality hypothesis, explaining how reading proficiency is based on rapidly connecting word representations in terms of its spelling, its pronunciation, and its meaning. Where I think this comes in and where I want to mention is that I think we know a lot about phonological to orthographic connections. And I think we have lots of different ways to measure them. But I think we're just starting to learn about the importance of the semantic phonological orthographic connections in word learning, in decoding. Research going on here, Laura Stacey's group doing some fantastic work on set for variability and students' ability to adjust pronunciations, adjust partial pronunciations to match a word in their oral vocabulary. Work by Devin Kearns indicating that when students knew the meaning of words, they're better able to correct those partial or inaccurately decoded words, or words that are more imageable, words that more immediately you're able to conjure an image of that word, or perhaps learn more readily than words that are less imageable. This speaks to perhaps the stronger integration of semantic information or vocabulary within word reading instruction intervention. Several studies have tested this. Is there a benefit of integrating vocabulary knowledge within decoding instruction? And it's pretty equivocal. 4 studies found that it did. 4 studies found that it really didn't. But one I want to talk about in particular, this is Christy Austin's dissertation. She's another former UT student. But she did a within subject study looking at the relative effects of integrating word meaning instruction within decoding versus decoding alone. And finding that in the condition in which students had semantic information, vocabulary integrated with decoding instruction, students demonstrated stronger accuracy at immediate post-test and at follow-up, as well as stronger word reading fluency. Okay. One difference about her study was consistent with some other work that did find benefit of integrating vocabulary knowledge, is that the words that were targeted were longer, more complex, and usually less phonetically regular, compared to studies that did not find such a benefit of this integration. And so this knowledge of word meanings may be particularly helpful in learning to read more complex, more multisyllabic, less phonologically regular words. So what does this mean for assessment? Well, vocabulary and semantic instruction, first of all, probably should be a more integral and not separate part of word reading instruction. We can talk about how we can teach how to read a word, but also simultaneously reinforce what it means and use it in a sentence. This type of instruction, I think, is especially important for emergent bilingual students and for students who are less familiar with vocabulary and syntax that's common to school and to print. From an assessment standpoint, I think we consider measures of vocabulary a lot when we consider reading comprehension, but we should probably consider them a little bit more in instruction intervention for word reading. Think about what those semantic connections, that semantic information does for improving word reading acquisition over time. I think there's also still questions about reading comprehension, intervention, and database decision making. I think we have to pay attention to the evidence that the majority of students who are referred for reading comprehension difficulties usually demonstrate some difficulties in basic skills or in vocabulary. Okay? It very often doesn't come down to a pure reading comprehension difficulty. Very often it's something about the foundational skills that make comprehension possible that requires some support. I'm working with Marcia Barnes on the development of the connected intervention. This is an intervention aimed at improving inferential reading comprehension for struggling readers in grades 6 through 8. And I bring this up because we're finding some interesting information that speaks to perhaps the adaptability and personalization of intervention going forward, the connection between assessment and intervention. So Amanda Martinez-Lincoln, another former UT student in her dissertation, looked at the differential effectiveness of this connected intervention based on the computer versus delivered by a teacher versus control, and finding that the computer-based connected intervention was more beneficial for students with self-reported reading anxiety and self-reported mind wandering while reading. In contrast, the computer-based version was less beneficial for bilingual or emergent bilingual students. We think because the teacher-led version, those teachers are better able to rephrase, to expand, provide more context, more information to the information compared to the computer, which always delivered it in the same way each time. And I think we can go further to uncover the possibilities and potential of personalizing interventions through assessment. Let's continue Carol Connor's landmark work, much of it done here at FCRR, in skill by treatment interactions, thinking about how we can personalize intervention and adapt it, really the essence of database decision-making, the nexus of where assessment comes into adapting and improving instruction. So to sum up, I think, again, thinking about simplicity, I think thinking about how we can continue to make things efficient, parsimonious, to the point, more relevant and practical. Let's collect the right data rather than just a lot of it. Let's refocus our attention on early prevention-oriented systems of data-informed intervention, giving teachers the right tools to be able to sort through data, to collect it very quickly and efficiently, and decide what to do for students that are struggling. We'll continue to push forward with advances in reading and development, uncover new directions on how assessment can guide intervention, and continue to study and refine systems that personalize and adapt intervention. Thank you.